Half a day students. Today we're going to be going over quadratic equations. We've actually done a lot of this work in prior topics, but this one focuses on solving quadratic equations. So first of all, you need to know the general form of a quadratic equation. That's when everything's on one side where a is greater than 0 and it's equal to 0. There are three methods to solve quadratic equations in general form. It's factoring, quadratic formula, and completing the square. We've done some of the factoring. For this one, it'll actually concentrate on factoring, and I'll have another video for quadratic formula. Completing the square, you don't need to know right now. It's a little bit more complicated. So here we go. Writing quadratic equations first in general form. What you want to do is remove grouping symbols and fractions. Move everything to one side wherever a is greater than 0. So wherever your x squared has a positive coefficient, and write in descending order. So x squared, x, and then the number. Okay, so for this one, I'll actually move this 5x to the left side. I'll take this and move it over there. So I'm going to do subtract it, 5x from each side. So we have 2x squared minus 5x plus 7 is equal to 0, since there's nothing on that side. A, B, and C are just the coefficients of each term, so A is going to equal to 2, B is equal to -5, and C is 7. This next one, I'm going to first get rid of grouping symbols by distributing this x. So we'll have x squared minus 3x equals 4x plus 1. Now I'll move everything on the right side to the left side. So when you subtract 4x and subtract 1. So we have x squared minus 7x minus 1 is equal to 0. Now we'll identify A, B, and C are coefficients. A is 1, B, -7, and C, -1. So one thing about writing quadratic equations in general form, you cannot have any fractions or decimals. So right now I have a fraction, right? 2 over 5. In order to get rid of that denominator, we've covered this before, you just have to multiply everything by 5. So both sides I'll multiply by 5. So I'm actually going to multiply this by 5 and this by 5. That'll actually cross out. That'll cancel out the 5 in the denominator. So I'll be left with 20x squared equals 2x. From there, I'll move it to the left side to put it in general form. So I'm going to subtract 2x from each side. So we have 20x squared minus 2x is equal to 0. Just a reminder, general form is in the form ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So when we're identifying a, b, and c, a is the coefficient of x squared, which is 20. B is the coefficient of x, which is -2. And you'll notice that there's no c, there's no extra number there. So then we're just going to interpret our c as 0. So if I was ever to have like 3x squared plus 4 is equal to 0, if there's no x, then your b is actually going to equal to 0. Now that we've practiced writing equations in general form, now we're going to go into solving by factoring. Again, whenever you have a quadratic equation, you should always try to solve it by factoring first, because factoring is the easiest method if you're able to use it. Otherwise, you could use the quadratic formula, which takes longer but can work for any equation, any quadratic equation. Now we're working on complete quadratic equations. That means to say a, b, and c are not 0, so we have x squared, x, and a number. So first we're going to move this all to one side. So we're going to have x squared minus 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. We'll do the same thing that we always do for factoring. This is going to give us different signs. The difference, the bigger one, is going to be negative. So we're looking at factors of 8. That will give me a difference of 2. So I already know that's going to be 4 and 2. I want to make the bigger one negative, so it'll be x minus 4 times x plus 2 is equal to 0. From there, we'll solve using the zero product property, which means that either x minus 4 or x plus 2 have to equal to 0 to make this entire product equal to 0. So I'm going to set both of them to 0. X minus 4 equals 0, or x plus 2 is equal to 0. From there, we have x equals positive 4, or x equals negative 2. Two values of x. Moving on to letter B, we'll first put it in general form by moving everything to the left side. So we have 4x squared minus 2x minus 2. Again, when it moves to the other side, we're going to change the sign, right? We're subtracting it to the other side, is equal to 0. We're going to factor this. So first of all, I see that all of these are divisible by 2, so I'll actually factor out 2 first to make it easier for myself. 2x squared minus x minus 1 is equal to 0. I'll actually just divide this 2 out to get rid of it because it doesn't matter. 2x squared minus x minus 1 is equal to 0. So this 2 doesn't really matter because for 2a to equal to 0, a has to be 0, right? 0 times anything is going to be equal to 0. So if you have a constant, it doesn't matter on the outside because it doesn't affect it going to 0. Factoring this one, I have 2x and x. For 1, I only have 1 and negative 1. So I'm going to have negative 2x plus 1. Different signs, right? Okay, so this is going to be equal to 0. That's correct. 2x plus 1 times x minus 1 is equal to 0. So equating each of these to 0, we have 2x plus 1 is equal to 0. Or x minus 1 is equal to 0. Solving for x, we have x is equal to negative 1 over 2. Or x is equal to positive 1. So now we're dealing with incomplete quadratic equations where one of our a, b, or c is going to be equal to 0. So first we just work on putting it in standard form. So here we have another fraction. I'm going to multiply both of these by 5. So we're going to multiply both sides by 5 in order to cancel out this denominator. So we have 20x squared equals 2x. Moving it to one side, I'm going to subtract 2x. So we have 20x squared minus 2x is equal to 0. For this one, it's not a trinomial and it's not a difference of squares, so I'm just going to factor out what they have in common. So they both are divisible by 2 and x. So I'm going to factor out 2x. So I'm left with 2x and then 10x minus 1 is equal to 0. From there, I still have a product, so I'm still going to apply my zero product property, right, which says that at least one of these has to be equal to 0. So I'm going to set 2x is equal to 0, or 10x minus 1 is equal to 0. Solving for x, divide by 2, divide by 2. X is 0, or add 1 and divide by 10. X is equal to 1 over 10. For the second one, I'll actually probably solve algebraically. So looking at this, I'll probably add 5 to both sides. So we'll have 3x squared is equal to positive 5 divided by 3. So we have x squared is equal to 5 over 3. From there, to get rid of this x squared, I'm going to actually have to take the square root. But since I'm solving, I'm going to have to take the plus or minus square root. So plus or minus square root of x squared plus or minus square root of 5 over 3. So x is going to be equal to the plus or minus square root of 5 over 3. So you should remember that we can never put fractions within a radical, and also radical cannot be on the denominator, right? So what I'm going to do is split this up into two different radicals, square root of 5 over square root of 3, and then rationalize my denominator. So we have x is equal to plus or minus root 5 over root 3. I'm going to rationalize by multiplying both sides by square root of 3, so the top and bottom. So we have root 3 over root 3. This is going to equal to plus or minus square root of 5 times square root of 3 is the square root of 15 over root 3 times root 3 is just 3. You might want to look at your radical again to see if you can break it down one more time. I cannot simplify this, so this is my answer. Lastly, we have a word problem. The area of a square is 32 feet squared, or 32 square feet. Find the length of its side. So I already know I'm going to have to first find a formula for the area of a square. The area of a square is just its side squared. So area is equal to side times side, or side squared. So if the area is 32 feet, I can say, okay, so 32 is equal to s squared. So now I'll just solve. You can do it algebraically. We're going to take the square root. Usually when solving for s squared, so I need to take the plus or minus square root. So we have plus or minus square root of 32. I'll just move my s to this side, equals s. From there, I'm just going to simplify this radical. So 32 is divisible by, we want to see what perfect square it's divisible by, is divisible by 16. So we have s is equal to plus or minus root 16 times root 2, right? From there, I will simplify that root 16. Square root of 16 is just 4, so s is equal to plus or minus 4 square root of 2. Now that I've done the math, I'm actually going to look back at my question, see what it asks, and then answer this question. So the area of the square is 32 square feet. Find the length of its side. So if I want to find the length of its side, first of all, I can never have a negative length. Second of all, I need to have a unit. So my units are in feet, so I'll just forget about this minus sign. So I'll just say s is equal to, or you can say its side is 4 square root of 2 feet. Make sure you have feet there, and then you don't use a negative because you can't have a negative length. Again, factoring first. If you cannot factor, use a quadratic formula, and I'll link you to another video about using a quadratic formula. Good luck.